acknowledge that these are real, but then change the narrative from the truth, which is what we're putting out, to sort of a fantasy or sort of a diversion. And then those folks like Chris Mellon and Nick Pope and Elizondo would go up on Capitol Hill, whisper into the ears of folks like Senator Rubio of the Intelligence Committee and others, basically telling them false information. But the false information works when you can put it around something real. Now, what was the real thing? The tic-tac, the F-18 Hornets chasing off the coast of California, those events that happened, that the footage was leaked, it was a vehicle for them to attach that false narrative to it. Okay. So you have to understand how counterintelligence and psychological warfare operations are designed. It's very effective. I mean, it is very effective. I would say 90% of people who study UFOs got gaslit. Certainly the U.S. Congress and the media did. So they're very good at doing it. It doesn't mean that it's right, but I'd be very happy to go tete-a-tete on that with anybody. Operation after that, and those were transporting children and women and certain men who had certain capabilities that would be used in experimental projects here and in other countries. It's a monstrous program. There's a man who lives right near here who was a CIA operative and was very young, was one of these victims of this. And he wants to come forward, but he's quite frightened. He's already signed affidavits about it. But there's a CIA black site 160, not far from Nashville, that was involved in some of these operations, mostly drugs and drug running, but also trafficking.
So it's a human trafficking operation. It's part of Stargate.
Yeah, but you have to understand what it's for. It's not for, shits and giggles, excuse me. It's rather, I have to say, some of these projects, they're very disturbing. And I don't know how much people want to hear this, but
they want to hear it.
It will keep you awake at night. I mean, if you have children like I do. But they're used in very specific operations, and they're selected for certain capabilities, particularly psi capabilities. Okay. And those are used in projects that these illegal projects are running for the purpose of communication logically. Most of the subjects die as a consequence of what they're made to do, but they have certain aptitudes and abilities for which they are screened, and then they are abducted and taken. Now, keep in mind, this is also, there are a lot of operations that are related to this. I want to word this very carefully. A little knowledge is an extremely dangerous thing here, because this is a hall of smoke and mirrors and deception. And you have to then wind this back. What would a clandestine operation have if unsupervised since the late 1950s, where they've had some of the most brilliant scientific minds I've ever met working these projects? They've had almost an infinite amount of money, trillions of dollars that have gone into the R&D, studying both human breakthroughs and also extraterrestrial vehicles, propulsion systems, communication systems, material science, what things are made of, how they're made. Well, you figure after 80 years of that and trillions of dollars, you're going to have some payoffs. And these payoffs are in the form of advanced advanced technologies, and ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles that are the man-made ones, but also this whole area of nanobiotechnology, consciousness and mind interface technologies, all manner of weapon systems that are what are called scalar or longitudinal, go faster than the speed of light. It's like an EMP, but on steroids. It has, instead of a wave like this for electromagnetic, it's a straight line that goes out longitudinally, called scalar. And those are faster than the speed of light. They can be used for interstellar communications, but they can also be weaponized. They've been weaponized. So there are all manner, there's a whole constellation again of sciences and technologies, and the CIA science and technology guys, I've met with some of them, that are so far beyond what, let's call it the white world, the legal government, including Lockheed, Northrop Grumman. My uncle never worked on this stuff. He worked on the lunar module, landed on the moon the first time. That was my mom's oldest brother. And his whole career was with Northrop Grumman. He was never read into this other end of it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things people have to keep in mind, most of the people in the military, CIA, special operations, corporate, what have you, who work in that world are not part of some vast conspiracy. It's incredibly tightly held. But that's in my view, that's their Achilles heel. By definition, it has to be kept pretty small, pretty tight, which makes them vulnerable if, we'll get to this later, if the U.S. government actually has the will to go the distance to get this under control. And they need to get it under control fairly quickly because it's getting out of hand.
Some of the 145 top secret facilities that you know about.
Well, everyone talks about Area 51. That's an old one. It's still operational. And particularly, S3, S4, Pahut Mesa, out in Groom Lake.
Are these in the U.S.?
Yeah, this is Nellis.
Okay.
That one. And that's operational, has been since the 50s. A more state-of-the-art one is actually in the Dugway Proving Grounds, which is in Utah.
Is this the one that you disclosed at the conference?
Yes.
I'm going to put a picture up of it right now.
And so that facility, there's something called the Avery sector, Avery, where there are these assets. There's an extraterrestrial vehicle that was being studied there when one of our witnesses, I think he was there in 2009, when that object had been downed. They're downed by these electromagnetic pulse weapons because the ET craft are completely electromagnetic. So, a kinetic weapon would not be so effective, missile or a laser. But an electromagnetic pulse or scalar weapon stuns them and they'll come down. Sometimes they crash, sometimes they're intact. If they're intact, then you have the whole thing to study. And that's where this man was in a facility where they had an entire intact one. And then, there's a vast underground facility there.
So they're downing these aircraft with basically a directed EMP weapon.
Yes, but are more sophisticated than the legal constitutional government would know about because you're going to add to normal EMP, let's call it a supercharged part of it that's scalar, what I mentioned before, where it's a point that goes out longitudinally without the waveform.
Okay.
So that's why, light propagates at 186,000 miles every second. These are not limited that way because it's a point that goes out straight line. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
So now you're exceeding the speed of light.
For now, back to the underground facility.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one in Dugway. It's what this gentleman firsthand had not been in it. He has the name of a scientist, senior scientist, U.S. government that was at the Dugway facility, and he said that the complex that's underground goes out. It's about 1,300 square miles. Not acres, miles.
1,300 square miles?
Yeah.
What's in there?
All this stuff. The technologies, the craft, operations. We know that I had a man who was out there who had special night vision. He was special operations and embedded, but he was a scientist. And he was out there, and wee hours, there were these massive triangular objects, silent, launching from that area, but underground, and would come out over the range. No lights on them, totally, fully operational. And, those are one category of the man-made advanced technology platforms, or alien reproduction vehicles, some people call them. There were quite a few out there at Dugway that were out in that particular area. And it's still there. I mean, it's not like you pick up an asset like that and move it to where. So we know where they are. And that's why our 145 facilities I've just learned of a new one that we'll be putting on that map soon. I'm supposed to be taken there.
Where's this?
I can't say where, but
Right
now.
Can we put the map up?
Yes, and you put the map up, you'll see many of them are places people know. They know Edwards Air Force Base, but where? Where do you go to at the Nellis Range? It's a huge range, Air Force Base. And then the Nevada test site, which is where we tested nuclear weapons, going north. But out there, there's some very key assets. And there's a Delta Force helo base out there that's used for retrieving extraterrestrial vehicles and retrieving downed, accidentally crashed man-made ones that malfunction. So we have a man on our team who was on a retrieval operation initially for conventional aircraft, jets, for their classified components. And then he got read into an operation retrieving the man-made ones, which blew his mind, the Raytheon and Northrop ones. Then he got read into the ones that are, he was on one operation where we stunned one of these extraterrestrial vehicles. This one I showed at the event. And it didn't crash. It got stunned and landed out there on the range, the Nevada test range. And they were moved in helos to retrieve it. And that interesting account of that, it began to come back to life. And an opening came out of it, and it looked like a fruit roll-up came down. And a couple of extraterrestrials emerged that he literally was in 3 or 4 feet of them. We have the drawing of them, of what they look like. But what happened is that at that point, that craft was being checked by helicopters in the air, as well as one of these ARVs, man-made ones, the triangular. When that happened in 2000 and I believe that was 2010, 11 time period.
So what's your goal with the Disclosure Project?
To guide the government in understanding this and getting them as much detailed, actionable intelligence as possible. Like the details, and this is how they've gotten this far. The reason the bill that just came out of committee and the Intelligence Committee is because they now understand, if you read that bill that is given sort of a safe harbor 6 months amnesty period for these corporations and people to come forward or they'll be prosecuted. That is in the bill that left committee. And I've been pushing for this for a long time. The first time I recommended it was in 1993 to Bill Clinton, and nobody wanted to do it. Now it's going to happen, but that sets a clock. And so the Disclosure Project's objective is to give the legal government of the United States that we have allegiance to, and we the people, the public, the information, so that these rogue and very criminal activities can be brought under proper supervision and control, access control. And that's not the case right now. And it's dangerous that it isn't. So it's a very big step that first in December, they signed this law allowing whistleblowers to come forward through the Pentagon process, which is a top secret SCIF situation. But now this bill is going to explicitly state that these corporations, anybody having exotic materials, clearly referring to extraterrestrial type materials, technologies, bodies, those have to be disclosed and turned over to the legal U.S. government, or they will then be subject to prosecution criminally. So that's a 6-month window now. So that clock has started.
That's a 6-month window. In the documentary, you talk about some of the UFO technology. The metal is so pure it cannot be replicated. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we think, if you're driving a car or flying on a Boeing 737 or whatever, we dig that stuff up, aluminum and metal. We smelt it, refine it, roll it, put it together, rivets, welding, etc. An extraterrestrial vehicle and all its components are not made that way. They are made by creating a sort of an ultrasonic, very high-tech wave that pulls, let's call it the substrate, the elementals that are subatomic, together on, if you can visualize this, like almost like a blueprint in energy, and it materializes it. So it's seamless. Even the parts that are in it, anything that's energy or electronic related is on a nanomolecular level entwined in it. So this is why it's very hard to study this stuff. I mean, it's not like taking apart a Soviet MiG or something. I know the men who worked on these projects, and I mean, you're dealing with really extraordinary, elegant, beautiful material sciences and matter. And that's why the materials are so pure, because they're not dug up and refined. They're actually assembled from this baseline energy matter interface in space-time. And make it real for you. There was a captain on a Navy contract vessel back in '62 or '63, and before he died, and he had been, they were testing the Atlas rockets for intercontinental ballistic, but these didn't have nukes on them. They were testing the rocket and guidance systems way back. And they had a lot of UFO sightings because the ETs were watching how we were developing and kind of this breakout speed with thermonuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic, Cold War. And one night they had an object on radar. It was triangulated. They had it on ship radar. So the captain has this guy say, hey, look, well, we have this boogie. And then it got confirmed from the command center. And they said, because they were able to do that, unfortunately, they triangulated it, and it was hit with some kind of weapon. This was '63, and it dropped, boom, like a rock right into the South Atlantic Ocean. So he was vectored over to the estimated point of impact and was there to retrieve it. And I have his whole story, and he never wanted to come forward because even when he had to have surgery once, they had an intelligence guy in there when he was under anesthesia to be sure he didn't talk about this. But I have his whole information. So what happened is that when he got to the site, there was about a 6x6 pod, and they pulled it up on the ship. And it wasn't the whole craft. The whole craft had gone down, but apparently there was some sort of one molded thing, and there were four, I'm going to use his language, little men that look like the color of a Sicilian, kind of brown, but 39 inches tall, no hair, and also no external ears, no pinna, flaps, very fine featured. But the reason he contacted me, and this is why this is so funny, I've debriefed over 1,000 men like this. He said, I can't figure out how they got in and out of their uniforms. So they had a one-piece uniform, now no zipper and no buttons, and no visible way they could get them out of this thing. And he says, how do they put them on? I said, well, they don't need a zipper or a button because they are kind of materialized around them and then dematerialized off using this technology, this very advanced transdimensional physics. And he went, oh my God, I would have never done it. I said, no, I mean, it's how they're doing it. So this is why people who encounter an actual ET craft or the EBINs, extraterrestrial biological entities, and they see even their clothing, none of it tracks because it's so far advanced.
Look, I don't trust the mainstream media. Anyways.
Well, no, they're asset of this group,
but
absolutely.
A lot of people do, and a lot of people don't put any legitimacy on anything unless Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC,
right.
Unless they touch it, nobody.
Right.
I'm not going to say nobody because there's a growing. The population that doesn't believe in the mainstream media is just continuously getting larger.
It's probably half the population. Yeah.
But why do you think, I mean, that would be the biggest story in the world. Mm-hmm. We've recovered an ET craft with bodies. Mm-hmm. And on every news network, they're all covering it. Mm-hmm. And then just like that, it's gone. No photos, no nothing. Mm-hmm. What happened? Why do you think it just disappeared?
Well, we know why. I mean, in 2001, when we did the first National Press Club event, we had a guy who was on a team that for several years in the 60s retrieved the bodies and the craft. And he spoke, and he had all of his information there. His name is Sergeant Clifford Stone. He's in our archive. Go look at it. So the people we just had at the National Press Club, a decorated U-2 pilot, who encountered these objects back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, worked at the Lockheed operations and skunk work interface with Ben Rich directly, personally. He didn't get to go into that. But these guys are all available to give testimony. These are firsthand. David Grush was secondhand. He never was principally involved. Stephen Digna, there with and saw, was with two Raytheon guys with these man-made Raytheon devices. DC Long was in an underground facility out on the Range 19 with some Delta guys, took his dad in, who was a contractor, and they accidentally saw this system levitating a 100-ton concrete block up in the air, along with some giant boulders. Absolutely true. And we had people who were, at other operations that we brought. Now, those are all 100%. Every one of our 750 Disclosure Project folks are firsthand witnesses, meaning that they weren't people trying to find out like David Grush was. They're people who actually were in there. Interesting that the media won't interview them.
It is.
Though, if they really want to know the truth, why would you want to talk to a field operator who didn't have firsthand information and skip over the people who actually touched the things, saw them? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the public has to ask the question very quickly. How do we get the truth out? Now, whether the media, the corporate media, I honestly believe is controlled by this same corrupt enterprise.
I mean, Doc, they're definitely controlled. I mean, there's multiple videos of them all reporting the exact same shit. I mean,
right.
It's ridiculous that anybody even watches it anymore.
Well, I mean, it's staged. And the problem with that, they do have, and this is the other big announcement, if there are any attorneys listening, we now have over 150 attorneys and legal professionals on our legal team. And not only will they protect and defend any whistleblowers and the project, but they also we're moving quickly towards issuing a civilian RICO, Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organization lawsuit, who are going to be in the target, all these corporations and individuals. You can't use a civilian RICO against a government agency, but you can target the individuals and the corporations. That we are going to be doing in concert with this bill, saying now you need to come in out of the cold or you'll be criminally. We can't criminally prosecute, but there is a U.S. attorney who's on the team that when we find actionable intelligence and get it introduced into court in a civilian RICO, he would then take it and see if he can pursue it under a criminal statute.